Joe Biden keeps claiming that he's at the end of his tether with his mate Benjamin Netanyahu. He keeps leaking to the press that he is increasingly uneasy about the assault on Rafah. Where is Rafah? It's right on the border between Palestine and Egypt. It has a gate between Egypt and thus the outside world and Gaza. I myself have passed through it on dozens of occasions. So have many people in Britain, not the least of them on convoys with me and with the editor of this program, who have taken siege-breaking convoys through that gate many times. It is a town of 150,000 people, except now 1.9 million people are living there, although living is a moot point. Many of them are now dying there. Those that are not yet dead are living on the ground, in the water, in the sewage water, amongst the dogs, the cats and the rats. 1.9 million people living as now thrice or four times displaced people, cascading around a tiny area 25 miles long and at its narrowest 5 miles wide, being ordered from the north to the south, from the south to the east to the west, being moved around as if they were inanimate objects. But they are people. 70% of them are women and children. Just think about that. Just the same as the death toll, the casualty toll. Now well over 100,000 people in Gaza. Around 5% now of the entire population of the Strip are either dead, mutilated, wounded, or missing under the rubble. And when I say wounded, that might suggest that there was a chance that they could be treated. But of the 36 hospitals in Gaza, none are now entirely operative, and only 14 are operating at all. The hospitals have been bombed, besieged, blown up. And the latest is the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. That's the place the Palestinians were told to go to and be safe. It's now completely demolished. The hospital is under siege. Artillery fire is raining down on the hospital, and internationally eminent surgeons and doctors are begging people to contact them somehow, by some means, so that they can talk to the world about a situation literally of genocide which they are facing. The patients, the doctors, the nurses have nowhere to run, have nowhere to hide. Their hospital is being demolished all around them. But in Rafah, the situation is even more dire, because these 1.9 million people are literally being bombed in their tents, those of them lucky enough to have tents. Inside the tents, the children are sleeping in water. There's water everywhere, but there's not a drop to drink, because the water is contaminated and unfit for human consumption. Lying in a tent in water with your family, your children, maybe even your grandchildren too, you are waiting for the bombs to drop upon you, destroy your tent, destroy your family. Many tens of thousands have no tent and are literally living on the cold earth in which they might soon be laid. The artillery fire now raining down on them is matched by naval firepower, firing on them from sea, air power and land power and sea power against 1.9 million people. Refugees entitled to the protection of the international community, protection of which there is none. President Macron of France said today that Israel must cease and desist its assault on Rafah. But he didn't add or else, because there is no or else. It's just wind and maturation. It's just words. They say they're concerned. Cameron, Macron, Biden, all of them keep saying they're concerned, but there's no or else. None of them will do anything, not even demand an immediate ceasefire and the withdrawal of the besieging Israeli forces from the territory, let alone force Israel to accept its international obligations under the Oslo agreements to allow the existence, the creation of a Palestinian state. Remember, if you're old enough, 30 years ago when this was signed on the White House lawn. Mind you, the then Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, was then murdered by Netanyahu's supporters. And they didn't just murder Rabin, they murdered the peace process and the Oslo agreements. These Western governments, who are also concerned, how could you not be, in front of your own electorate, in front of your own courts? And whatever happened to the International Court of Justice, which said that plausibly Israel was committing genocide? Do you know how strong a word genocide is or should be? Nothing has been done to enforce that judgment of the International Court of Justice. Israel is still in the Eurovision Song Contest, still in the European Football Championship, still in FIFA, still in the World Cup, still competing with its flag in international tennis competitions, and worse than all of that, Israel is still receiving bombs, missiles, shells, aircraft parts from the United States of America. Israel is still receiving billions of dollars from the United States of America. It is still receiving intelligence overflights by the Royal Air Force of the United Kingdom, flying out of Cypriot territory, which Britain claims is its sovereign territory, in the airbase at Akrotiri. These intelligence overflights are guiding the bombs down on the Palestinian refugees in Gaza. Although what intelligence you need to do that is, of course, again, a moot point. But back to Joe Biden. He keeps saying he's very, very uneasy about this attack on Rafah, but he confirmed in the last day that there will be no sanction upon Israel if they do not do as Biden asked them to do, to conduct their assault on Rafah in a way that does not damage innocent civilian population. Well, of course, there's no way to avoid the damaging of the innocent civilian population. Bombs don't discriminate between the political stripe of the people amongst whom the bombs are falling. There is no way of softly assaulting a tent city of 1.9 million people. But when you tell Netanyahu in advance that whatever it is that you're going to do, there will be no sanction upon you for what it is you're about to do, and which has already started at the edges and now is moving towards the denouement. If you tell the savage assailant that you will not punish him in any way if he does what you say you don't want him to do, then of course that constitutes a green light. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, opposition leader in Britain, never mind Sunak, he's a wolf. Starmer is a fox. The fox looks like it's smiling, makes you think it might be your friend, but the intention, of course, of both is entirely the same. They intend to eat you. Keir Starmer, a human rights lawyer, a King's Counsel, the highest echelon of British lawyers, has still not said one single word about the judgment of the International Court of Justice 2 weeks ago that his friends, and no bigger friend of Israel exists even in the British Parliament. Although, by the way, 8 years ago, I was in a room when he was on the platform calling for Israel to be kicked out of football because of its racism. Funny how 8 years can change things, but no greater friend of Israel exists in the British Parliament than Sir Keir Starmer. But he has not been able to say a word about the ICJ ruling. Starmer said on television, we all saw his lips move, that Israel had the right to cut off electricity and water to 2.3 million people, refugees entitled to international protection, that they had the right to cut off water and electricity, even though, unless he's fooling us and he's not a King's Counsel, he must have known that they had no such right at all, that such actions are explicitly illegal under international law, under the laws of war, under the Nuremberg tribunals, under the Geneva Conventions. All of these things are declared specifically, explicitly illegal, but Keir Starmer, the leader of the so-called Labour Party, said that Israel was entitled to do so. Well, his party is now imploding. Let me tell you from a Rochdale perspective. This show, get used to it, is coming live from Rochdale. The Labour Party had a candidate against me. I was already beating him soundly. But there's no Labour candidate anymore. Labour has withdrawn from the election, even though this is a Labour seat, has been a Labour seat for decades, even though Labour controls the city council. They no longer have a candidate in the highest profile by-election for many, many years, probably since the last one I beat them in 2012 in Bradford West. I can tell you that without equivocation because I've spent the day being besieged by media wanting to interview me about this by-election. It's very high profile indeed. And the official opposition don't have a candidate. How? Why? Because a secret recording emerged of the Labour candidate making remarks which he described, not me, he described in his mother of all apologies as soon as the recording was broken by a British newspaper. His remarks were ugly, ignorant, stupid, inflammatory, and unwise, and were entirely false. His knees were sore, but for an entire day, for an entire news cycle, the Labour Party accepted his apology because they knew that if they didn't, I was waiting in the wings to be the elected Member of Parliament here in Rochdale. But it soon became clear that they were unable to hold that line because Keir Starmer came to power in the Labour Party, blaming his predecessor for presiding over a culture of anti-Semitism. And Corbyn was kicked out of the Labour Party by his successor, imagine. And Corbyn's allies were kicked out of the Labour Party by his successor. And thousands of people were expelled, were suspended from the Labour Party because of their association with Jeremy Corbyn and his alleged culture of anti-Semitism. Now, of course, the anti-Semitism was a scam. What they meant was anti-Israelism. What they meant was criticism of Israel. And what Corbyn should have done is exactly what I'm doing, which is to say, unequivocally, never retreat from it, don't budge an inch. Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are two entirely different things. And if you mix them up, you run the risk of anti-Semites getting in under the fence. Because if everybody is called an anti-Semite, well, have you ever heard of the boy who cried wolf? The wolf was real. Anti-Semitism is real. But if you accuse mild-mannered Jeremy Corbyn of being an anti-Semite, then you might as well say everybody who has any criticism of Israel to make is an anti-Semite. And even my Labour opponent, who's been forced out of the race, in the published broadcast, he may have said other things. Some people say he did. And if he did, let's see them, let's hear them. And if he said anything anti-Semitic, let's condemn what he said and condemn him for saying it. But in the published account of what he said, which was stupid, false, ignorant, and all the other things I said, there was no anti-Semitism at all. It was a stupid conspiracy theory that Israel had deliberately allowed the attack on October 7th to happen and brought about the destruction of hundreds of Israeli citizens. That's wrong. It's untrue. It's definitely inflammatory. It's incendiary. It's ignorant. It's false. But it's not anti-Semitic, because to attack Netanyahu's government is not anti-Semitism. It's anti-Netanyahuism. It's anti-Israelism. And then the next night, they suspended yet another Labour MP and candidate in a nearby constituency for comments he made at the same meeting that my Labour opponent was secretly recorded. This fellow is a Blairite called Graham Jones. He has supported Keir Starmer's line of cutting off water and electricity. Publicly, he has done so. He is recorded saying the two words, fucking Israel, and saying that people who go from Britain to fight for the Israeli armed forces and then come back to Britain should be locked up. He said that it was illegal for them to do so. It actually isn't, but ought to be illegal. But again, his published remarks are not anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semitic to say the words fucking Israel. It's not anti-Semitic to say that people who go and fight for a foreign army should be locked up and put on trial on their return. I never thought I'd end up defending Graham Jones, whom I loathe with every fibre of my being. But what he said was not anti-Semitic at all. Now a third MP in the south of England, is up on a similar charge. A Councillor Dad in Lancashire, is under threat of suspension for the same thing. Look, why don't we suspend all candidates in all parties, in all elections, until Israel approves them? Is that the democracy we want? And we have to ask ourselves, why is the entire political class in Britain in thrall to a tiny little country 2,200 miles away from here, and nothing can be said by anybody here which they don't like? What is it? What hold is it that this little country has on our politics in Western countries? We all know in America it's about money, but the sums of money here in Britain are paltry. By American standards, you'd laugh. You can only spend about £14,000 in a general election in one constituency. Are these people enthralled to Israel for £3,000, £4,000 or £5,000? In which case, they're precious cheap. If other lobbyists knew how cheap they were, they'd be moving in and getting a piece of the action. I don't know what the situation is. I don't know why they are so terrified of Israel that they're ready to sack their own candidates in the middle of a by-election when I am breathing down their neck. That's how scared of Israel they are. And when this is all over, and I fully anticipate it will be over with a couple of new letters after my name, we have to ask ourselves how, why, when British politics became effectively outsourced to Netanyahu's Israel, whose pleasure or displeasure dictates who can stand, who can win, who can be elected, and what policy they can follow. Now, I've already gone over my time. First, there were 11 candidates against me. The Green Party first fell over Islamophobic tweets that would turn your hair white if you read them, and which showed the level of due diligence the Greens employed in picking their candidate against me. The Labour candidate has fallen, and a third candidate may very well fall. At this rate, I'll have nobody to beat on the 29th of February. And some of you fools say there's no God. It's the mother of all talk shows.